I inquired about the recording the next day, I was disappointed to find out that it was not used to its full potential and the meeting was not recorded.
It's not the most honest form of government, I think, to be hiding behind trying to do things in secret.
This is not naive multilateralism, nor is it relying on their institutions. It's building coalitions that work, issues by issue, with partners who share enough common ground to act together.
Welcome to This Week Uncut. We take a look at the top stories of the week from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We begin this week in the international stage in Davos, Switzerland.
That's right, the World Economic Forum, where Prime Minister Mark Carney made quite an impression, not just at home here in Canada, but around the world. You're seeing clips of his speech on every news station, it seems, in the U.S. as well, because he definitely went in to make a very bold statement. What were your thoughts upon hearing his 18-minute speech?
Yeah, it was certainly a statement. There were several moments throughout the speech where, it was like a really significant moment. And to me, the most significant moment was when he said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And what he's talking about there is the U.S. president's ventures in sort of conquering other countries, but first Venezuela, now he wants Greenland. We were the 51st state for a little while, and I don't know that was entirely a joke. So there were many moments that stood out, but I think what he was trying to do was make a statement. People are criticizing him and saying, there might be consequences for what you've done, especially given Donald Trump's reaction after he gave that speech. And maybe there will be consequences, but I think that was exactly his point.
I think so as well. I know that you're right. When they said 51st state, when Donald Trump was saying 51st state around this time a year ago, Canadians, I think, surprised each other by standing strong across this huge continent of a country that we do have. And now we're seeing this trickle into other ventures of the Trump administration. And I think Canada, once again, having done what we did for our own country last year, is telling other middle-of-the-road countries, as Carney was saying, that might not feel like they are a world superpower, but if they unite together, could stand up to countries such as the U.S., though he didn't really name names in the speech so much, it was implied.
Yeah, well, I think you could take a number of implications from what he said, but essentially he was setting up the stage to what he described as middle power. So he's talking about Canada, he's talking about Europe, he's talking about the countries that are sort of, in the middle. They're not China, they're not the US, but they are strong economies and they have things that are working for them. And Carney has done a number of things over the last several months that are helping Canada separate themselves from the United States and our reliance on that relationship. I don't know if we can ever truly completely separate our relationship. We share a border, so that's a bit difficult. But he recently made a deal with China on low cost quality electric vehicles. He's been in Qatar making a deal there. He is working on increasing defense spending. He's doing all of the things that I think needs to be done to sort of encompass what he was trying to say in that speech.
I was going to say, with that speech saying the middle-of-the-road countries to unite, this comes on the heels, though, of his visit to China, where he did come to a trade deal with Xi. Part of that will be beneficial to the Atlantic provinces with deals on lobsters and things like that, negotiations going forward, lowering tariffs on certain seafoods. So it should be interesting to see how that plays out on the world stage. But again, it is definitely setting us up to be at odds with the United States right now and to make a bold departure from our relationship that we've known in the past. But he says in his speech, he was saying that, history is really taking a moment right now. We can't go back to the way we used to be. We can have nostalgia for how it was, but we will not be able to go back to the way things used to be.
Yeah, we have to take our sign out of the window. And the other thing is that I would say, he says it's a rupture, right? And that word itself signifies that it cannot be repaired. And even if it was repaired, it would be broken. It would be, pieced together, and it would not be the same way that it was, as you said, before. It can never go back to the way it was. What the Trump administration has done is irreparable, I think, to some degree. And so here we are. We have this obstacle in front of us, and so how do we move forward as a government? And it remains to be seen how this all plays out, because we've got 3 more years left.
It's true, and I think so much of the time the conversation becomes about the economy, and I think we have reached this moment in time where I think just talking about the economy isn't enough. Human rights have played a role the whole way through, but I think now we're reaching this boiling point where just talking about the economy is really just a piece of what's going on in the world right now. But for those of you who missed the World Economic Forum, here is a portion of Prime Minister Carney's speech.
For decades, countries like Canada prospered under what we called the rules-based international order. We joined its institutions, we praised its principles, we benefited from its predictability. And because of that, we could pursue values-based foreign policies under its protection. We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. The multilateral institutions on which the middle powers have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, the architecture, the very architecture of collective problem solving are under threat. On critical minerals, we're forming buyers' clubs anchored in the G7 so that the world can diversify away from concentrated supply. And on AI, we're cooperating with like-minded democracies to ensure that we won't ultimately be forced to choose between hegemons and hyperscalers. This is not naive multilateralism, nor is it relying on their institutions. It's building coalitions that work, issues by issue, with partners who share enough common ground to act together. In some cases, this will be the vast majority of nations. What it's doing is creating a dense web of connections across trade, investment, culture, on which we can draw for future challenges and opportunities. Argue the middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But I'd also say that great powers can afford for now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. We also had MP John Williamson in right after Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum. So I got the chance to speak to him about that too. I know that the Conservatives are always going to take a more critical lens to Liberal speeches and whatnot, but it was interesting to get his perspective on what he thinks this means going forward.
Yeah, he was one of the people who said there are going to be consequences for what Prime Minister Carney said. I don't know that all of the criticisms that he gave yesterday were fair about the Liberal government. I distinctly heard something about that, it being the worst job market ever or something to that degree. And the job market has seen strong growth in 2025. And I wanted to just look to make sure I was right. It is cooling, but it went from 6.5 to 6.8%, the unemployment rate. So it's not the worst it's ever been. These ebbs and flows are happening because of the context of the global economy and the sort of fracture that we're in the moment. But I would certainly say it's not the worst job economy Canada has ever been in.
Mm-hmm. We're also seeing Canadians showing their solidarity in trends like travel trends as well. The U.S. border, just from the New Brunswick borders alone, 700,000 less people crossed in 2025 than in the previous year. So Canadians really are saying their feelings through their actions as well. And I know a lot of that comes down to people assuming, I know there was one poll that said they assumed fishing and forestry, because actually Atlantic Canada is the group of Canadians that is traveling over the least, which is quite surprising because you think of a lot of our lives around here, how much of the time so many of us used to go over to the U.S. on a weekly basis, and that just isn't the reality of most people anymore. But this has a large loyalist history in this part of the world, so I think it goes deeper than just saying forestry and fishing are reasons why Atlantic Canadians aren't going to the U.S. I think it's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important to remember is if you go back to the summer when the governor of Maine was here visiting with Premier Susan Holt, the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, said, the little mom and pop shops in Maine along the border are not going to survive if New Brunswickers or Atlantic Canadians are not going to visit them and spending their money there. And in the same breath, the Premier of New Brunswick said, I cannot in good conscience advocate for Canadians to go across the border. She, at that point, didn't think it was safe, and I don't think that situation has gotten any better. Because what Canadians might not understand is that the governor of Maine has no control over the border agency, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They have no control over that. That is of the federal jurisdiction. So she can't tell them what they can and cannot do, and that directive is coming from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. And as we see this week as well, she said that in the summer months, but if we look at January 2026, we now do have ICE presence in Maine. So things are changing and quite rapidly.
Yeah, and I mean, I've spoken to people who are, going, across the border or not going across the border. And some of them feel like it's just normal. This is what I do. I go over, every second weekend, or nothing has changed. No one's asked me for anything. And then I've talked to people who, had gone over before and tried to go over again, and then were met with, a majorly invasive search or something to that nature, and so then they've stopped going over. Right, there are consequences to the actions that are being taken by American Customs at every border, and so it is not surprising to me that the numbers are down. But I do know Canadians who are still supporting our U.S. neighbors, because I don't actually think it's about them. Yeah. It's about the administration.
And I think, something that doesn't get looked at enough that we feel right here in Charlotte County is the number of Americans who are either coming to this part of the world part-time or have fully moved here, whether they're able to or not. I know the real estate agents are getting a lot of phone calls about Americans wishing to relocate, but it's a it's an unprecedented time in my life. I've never seen this sort of exodus from the U.S. even wanting to come to this side, and a lot for reasons they feel about safety or just values.
Yeah, this is going to continue. I think if we don't see sort of any, backing away from some of the things that are happening in the moment, it's going to continue. And unfortunately for the Trump administration, what he's doing only means that the American people are going to suffer as a result. Tariffs are paid for by the people who are charging them. New Brunswickers not going to Maine is because they don't want to participate in American culture. So these are consequences that they're going to face. And if it doesn't stop or it doesn't slow down or there's no change, it's going to stay that way. And it's going to be, the consequences are going to be devastating. So while we're talking about consequences to Mark Carney's, standing up to America on the global stage, there are consequences for what's happening in America as well.
Here is my interview with MP for St. John, St. Croix, John Williamson.
Look, I thought he did identify some real problems that we're facing vis-a-vis our relationship, not only with the United States, but around the world. And I think that's one reason why the speech has gathered the attention it has, because I think it spoke for a lot of countries. So it was interesting in that sense. I'm not sure where it leaves Canada, though. We're still the only country out there without a deal with the U.S. administration, President Trump. Tariffs under his leadership, Mark Carney's, have only gone up in this country, putting our economic security more and more at risk. And I'm not sure a speech like that, while I think it again met the moment in terms of what people are feeling, I'm not sure it helps his bargaining position with Donald Trump, because the very next day the president was there as well, and he did have Mark Carney in Canada in his sights, and I don't think that's going to leave us in a good position. I want to see an agreement with the United States on good terms on both sides. But I think that requires that we be focused and we deal with the Americans face to face, and not be taking shots at the president the day before he's there in a forum that he's going to obviously hear and respond to.
Trump definitely, you could tell he took offense to Carney's speech.
Yeah.
He even addressed him as Mark, not Prime Minister Carney. But some people are saying this speech did call for middle ground countries like Canada and Europe to unite. It's a bold statement. He didn't name names so much in his speech, but definitely that was an underlying message that countries like Canada should team up, not build our own fortresses with like-minded nations.
And I think that's smart. But in politics, it's often smarter to do strategy and not talk strategy. So let's get it done. Let's secure and foster better relations with trading partners around the world. But so far, and I recognize people, I think a lot of people are applauding Mr. Carney, but his record's not been very good since he's been Prime Minister. We don't have a deal. Tariffs are going up. There's more economic uncertainty. Investment in this country is falling because of that, because investors, and that's Canadian businesses, are very concerned about investing in this country when they don't know what the rules of the games are. And again, it's not like Canada is with a large pack. We are the outlier. We're the only country that does not have a deal with the United States.
That was a part of my interview with MP John Williamson, who was in the CHCO studio this week.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to discuss how staff-led meetings are being held in closed session in Charlotte County.
In other words, you can have freewheeling discussions and debates, which are respectful, but that's to show the people, and to show the people the diversity on the council, if there is any, so they can see that there's someone there who believes what they believe as a voter.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
So I continued my sort of look at municipal governance, starting in St. Andrews, who at a recent council meeting reviewed their procedural bylaw and made some pretty significant changes to the operation of those meetings.
Right, and this is, I should mention for people at home too, Nathalie is doing an extensive series on municipal politics, in part because we have the municipal elections coming up in May 2026. So whether you're thinking of running or just want to get into following council a little more closely, because I know I'm biased by saying this, it is fun to know what's going on in this great detail in your community. But we appreciate what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what you're uncovering in terms of these, particularly, let's start with the staff-led meetings in St. Andrews, which is something you and I learned about, I think it was in August of 2025, that these staff-led meetings that used to be held enclosed were supposed to be open to the public. And so that's how you and I started going. They're not ones we televise at this point in time, but we are attending them now.
And that's not going to start.
Okay.
The new procedural bylaw does not broadcast these meetings, which to some degree is fine. The problem that we identified is that in that original procedural bylaw 23-06, said it's not open to the public. And so there are, as I've said in the last episode, a certain number of specific exemptions under which you can go into closed session. None of those are presentations, none of those are discussions of initiatives, none of those are discussions of policy or direction or guidance on the part of council. And so it sort of occurred to me when the procedural bylaw came up on the agenda that maybe they were going to make some changes. And so I went back through it just to look to make sure that what I understood to be true was true. And then I requested a copy of the new bylaw, which for clarity is not enacted at the moment. It requires 3 readings of council and then ultimately a vote to bring it forward. But it does change it. It does allow for the meeting to be chaired by the chief administrative officer, which is a departure from what we sort of see in Eastern Charlotte and St. Stephen, where the mayor does continue to chair the meeting, but staff sort of lead the discussion. They're sort of, they're giving their reports, they're providing information. The CAO is giving policy guidance or recommendations, that sort of thing. So it is chaired by the mayor, but is staff led, so to speak.
Okay, so going forward, how big an issue do you think this is across municipal governments? I mean, all around the province. I know we focus heavily on our specific area, but is this something that you see has been happening all across the province?
Well, it's difficult to know because a lot of these councils are, not being followed very closely by journalists, simply because they don't exist in those communities. Some of these councils are really small and really new, and so it does really come back to training. It really does come back to, a deep understanding of legislation, what is required of you as an elected leader at that table, and so there are, I spoke to 2 professors, one of public policy and one who researches New Brunswick politics and has a very specific interest in municipal politics and who sat on council in Tantramar 20 years ago. And the way that they described it to me is, sure, there's a lot of pressure on municipal governments to be having these conversations. The public is demanding more of them. They want transparency. They're showing up in person. And so there's the idea is that perhaps they want to have these conversations uninhibited by the public. But Jamie Gillies' words, who is a professor of public policy at St. Thomas University, says the public's not going to stand for it. They're just not going to stand for it, right? If you're trying to limit public input, it's only going to last for so long. And I think that's sort of what we've sort of seen here. Someone found out that these meetings were being held enclosed. They drew it to the council's attention. And as a result of that, they've decided to open public access to these meetings. You and I have been attending them since August of 2025, because that is when they first appeared on the calendar. And, what is more shocking to me is that there's no record of anything that's happened before August of 2025. There's no minutes, there's no recording. Perhaps the clerk at the time was taking notes. Perhaps the CAO was taking notes. He obviously has, a guiding report that we now know he uses to lead the meeting, but we don't know. We don't know what was happened. 17 of those meetings since 2024 have been held in closed session.
So was it a citizen that noticed that?
That's
it was,
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go, if our viewers want to go back and watch the council meeting, Councillor Heenan said it had been brought to the attention of council by a concerned resident that perhaps these meetings were not compliant with the legislation, and they weren't.
And see, that's also, I mean, a good point for anyone watching at home, that you could be the person that notices something out of the ordinary, especially if you live in a community where you don't have a journalist attending every meeting. Citizens are the ones doing that work a lot of the time in those communities.
Right. And the other thing that Jeff Martin, the municipal politics researcher at Mount Allison University, said is, how can a voter truly be informed about how they want to be represented if they're not there for your opinions? If you're having these discussions behind closed doors, it's hard for them to know sort of where you stand. And he said to some degree that protects the council, because if they vote against something that the community wants, or they bring in something the community doesn't want, they can all go, we're not going to single anyone out because no one was there for that discussion but us. And so, it challenges the voter because they're only able to see what you show them. And so you can't only invite the public, he said, to communicate you in ways that suit you. They have to be with you at all times when it makes sense and when it is legally permissible, which is the majority of the time.
And when you hear that debate, it also helps you as the resident, as the citizen, really refine your own opinion and understanding of what's happening as well. I love when I can hear both sides. When I can hear people disagree, it actually helps me understand the situation even better, and different perspectives as well.
It's just plain and simple. The public needs to be at the table with you because you're only there because they let you be.
And I've said this before, we've talked about this on this show in the past, that around the time of COVID-19, when meetings had to be done online, that was really a crash course, but especially in smaller communities where you might not have the technology, you might not have a CHCO able to record your meetings for you. But it was a crash course in, okay, we can make this accessible. We can do this online if we have to. And so you saw everyone using their laptops and doing a Zoom meeting and having these council meetings online. I was at Eastern Charlotte this week for their January council meeting, and at public comment period in the end, a resident got up and said, they had a meeting recently where there was an owl, just one of those owls that you place in the middle of the room that's able to capture the whole meeting for people who aren't there. They were also able to zoom in counselors who weren't able to attend the meeting. And he said he went online after and he looked for it and he couldn't find it. And he said, that's the one thing, you didn't record it. It's the first time they had that technology there. Eastern Charlotte actually doesn't have even the technology in place. We record their monthly meetings, but they don't have technology in place for a counselor to, let's say, not be available in person but attend the meeting. And so this resident was asking for a little more transparency and pointing out just how easily technology can make this available to communities.
Yeah, I think the incoming councils are going to have a very different stage than the ones that are currently sat at the table. I do think that the more the public understands these rules and they're explained to them, the more they're going to want them to be followed.
Here is an excerpt from Eastern Charlotte Council public comment period for January 2026.
And also, I'm extremely disappointed in the way that code of conduct complaints have been happening in the municipality and how they've been happening behind closed doors.
One of the meetings I attended this month, I was impressed to see that we were utilizing the owl. This device allows us to stream the meetings from the location for participants to be in the discussion, as well as allowing meetings to be recorded. This made me feel like council was doing their part to address issues and concerning transparency and making information readily available, as well as looking for more potential participation from the community. During that meeting, it was used to allow someone to join from home and speak, which was great. When I inquired about the recording the next day, I was disappointed to find out that it was not used to its full potential and the meeting was not recorded. This is a huge missed opportunity in my mind. There are some councils in the area where this is the only way they can post their meetings, and they do this for both their regular meeting as well as their committee of whole. This would be great for when CHCO-TV is not available, allowing the public to stay informed and if not able to attend, additionally, this can be allowed to allow council to have a full quorum. I know there's times where you guys are away, you're in meetings or on vacation, what have you. But if you had the means and you were available, it allows you guys to jump in via remotely and still have your full quorum. As a taxpayer of Eastern Charlotte, I challenge the council and CAO to have the owl at every public meeting, regular community of the whole, public hearings, etc., that are open to the public that aren't a closed-door meeting. This will allow more public engagement. The meetings can be posted online and available to anybody who cannot make a meeting. With policy 9025, a lot of the meeting was not at this, and a lot of us were blindsided by it. If we had these meetings recorded, then we would have known in advance, and I think things could have been addressed more appropriately and went a lot smoother.
That was an excerpt from public comment period at Eastern Charlotte's January 2026 regular council meeting. It's really interesting that you're doing this series, especially in light of the fact that the Local Governance Commission has put mandatory training on the horizon potentially for councillors and staff as well of municipalities.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I think, when I'm talking to professors of public policy and research, and I'm even talking to the Union of Municipalities, the answer is, more training is needed, more education is needed. And so that's the very simple answer to this question. And actually, Councillor Greenlaw in St. Stephen said, how does the commission propose that we keep up to date with all of the legislation that we're required to follow? And then he, quickly also said, "Oh, training." So it's a very simple solution to a very real problem that is impacting municipalities. We're going to let you take a listen to Jeff Martin, a professor at Mount Allison University, speaking to me about closed meetings of council and public comment period.
It comes back again to councilors are given a 4-year term, and mayors, of course, the same thing, and they're given remuneration that has increased well past the rate of well more than the rate of inflation in many municipalities, because this municipal reform period was used as an opportunity to significantly increase council remuneration in many municipalities, including where I live in Tantramar. And there are resources there, and staff and people they steer the community and things like that. And the whole idea is the provincial law does not facilitate partisanship in municipal politics. We don't have municipal parties, so it's very much about individuals, and voters need to know. They need to know what individuals think on issues, and there needs to be the ability of media to cover that. And like in our discussion of St. Stephen, these meetings should not be used to avoid taking a stand publicly on what your priorities are. So in other words, I personally think that, again, it's how do you get anyone to enforce this? But I personally think that if you're going to have a strategic planning session, and the questions are things like, okay, are we going to build a new athletic center? Are we going to greatly improve the sidewalks? Are we going to do 1, 2, or 3 of these 6 different things, and how are we going to fund it, and so on? And what is our philosophy on, do we want to be debt free? What is our philosophy as individuals on what do we want to do with the tax rate? Those are things that should be done in public. Individuals should be able to see, okay, someone's going to come and look for my vote in 1 or 2 or 3 years, or this May, and I should, if I want to follow municipal government, I should know from that coverage and from seeing things on the internet or on television, where exactly my councillor or the person who's coming to look in my ward, or what is the councillor actually, forget about their campaign literature, what do they actually have they actually said in office? Do I think it's smart? Do I think it stands for, is it in accordance with my own values? Things are well thought out and well explained, so I'm going to vote for them even if I don't agree with everything that they stand for, because their brain's functioning. Like, you don't know that if you're only relying on the superficiality of a council meeting where not much is said because everyone's voting for motions and budgets and things that everything's been worked out in advance, and you don't know what part of the council do I want to strengthen by voting for those people and not others. So I think councillors often want to do things this way because it's if you're it's almost like we hang together or we hang in the morning. It's like let's stay unanimous as a group, and we're all protected because no one can figure out if there's something they don't like. Well, we can say, well, that's someone else's fault, but we can't really say who. And we'll all take credit for what the voters do like, even if some of us never supported it and don't. So it's not the most honest form of government, I think, to be hiding behind trying to do things in secret. And in fact, it is one of the things people dislike about federal and provincial politics, the fact that there's cabinet secrecy and everything's worked out behind closed doors, and the legislature is a bit of a show where you have very little genuine debate, and it's all about point scoring and things like that. I think there's no need for municipal government to be like that. In other words, you can have freewheeling discussions and debates which are respectful, but that's to show the people, and to show the people the diversity on the council, if there is any, so they can see that there's someone there who believes what they believe as a voter.
That was Jeff Martin, a professor at Mount Allison University in Sackville.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be discussing the municipal plan for St. Andrews.
Just saying, for general consumption, that people live in the rural areas because they want to live in the rural areas, and they don't like having dictated minimum. If they've got a piece of land, they don't like having dictated subdivision sizes.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We're going to take a look at the municipal plan in St. Andrews because this is coming up quite frequently in Charlotte County.
Mm-hmm. We are having the public hearing of objections on February 11th, so it really is around the corner. I know you've received a lot of letters to the editor. Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from the public.
Yeah, so I did cover the public engagement meetings on the municipal plan, where I did speak to a few people who were, I would use the word confused. The document is dense. It is filled with maps that are not only complicated to understand, but are very small and difficult to sort of navigate, and they've got all these colors. So this is not a document that is extremely digestible for the public. And so with that has come confusion, and that confusion also applies to a zoning bylaw, a separate document that coincides and is in relationship with the municipal plan.
Right. I was at a zoning bylaw presentation at the W.C. O'Neill Arena last week, and there were dozens of residents that came out. So great to see that. I know it was one of a few meetings, but definitely a lot of questions. A lot of questions about what does this mean. Some concerns about how big are we getting to as a community. So definitely I'll be interested to see how many people come out to the municipal plan hearing of objections. So.
Well, I do think that the greatest concern lives with the word density. It is the word that keeps coming to my desk, keeps coming to my email inbox, because there is concern that perhaps what is being allowed here is the densification of the town plat, which is part of it is a National Historic District, and one of the only very important things I've ever learned about Charlotte County is that St. Andrews residents are very particular about the downtown. They want it to look the way that it looks. Even the new building on Water Street was something that people were not particularly pleased about because it doesn't fit with the character of the town. So the word density is, I think, causing people to pause and say, what does this really mean? What could happen? Like if I'm in a medium density zone, what does that actually mean? Can someone build an apartment building beside me? Can someone build a Legion Hall beside me? Not that we don't want legions, I'm not saying that, but these are the questions that are coming to us about the municipal plan. The other component to this is the amalgamated areas, right? And I also talked to Jeff Martin about this because it also comes into, public engagement, right? The amalgamated areas are they've sort of been taken in into a government that they maybe didn't want, right? And so with that comes rules and expectations and, as we know, zoning. So they're not very happy with this situation because they want they want to live the way that they live because they chose to live in rural New Brunswick, right? But unfortunately, the decision has already been made. And so it's up now to the Council of the Town of St. Andrews, the planners at the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission to start listening to the people who are voicing their concerns and make the appropriate changes before passing the municipal plan and the zoning bylaw. There are only a few months left. Perhaps now is not the right time to do that.
Well, we knew that amalgamation especially would be, many years, growing pains. We're still feeling that. A lot of the questions that I heard from the public at the zoning bylaw draft meeting had to do, like you said, densification, especially if we are maybe even asking people to consider the idea of putting another unit on their property. Someone pointed out that in a historical district too, it's not just the property that exists that you want to keep intact, it's the whole, or the building itself, it's the property as well to consider. So, all sorts of questions that come up, very enlightening because it's often the residents that offer a perspective that you hadn't considered. Yeah,
the council this last year passed a heritage bylaw because there's so many, I think up to 30 buildings in the town plat that are considered historical, and so they have restrictions on how they can be changed. And so there is a lot of history here. And so when residents who have lived here either their whole lives or have decided to make this their home in retirement or make this their home for their families, densification is a scary word, especially when you go to a city and you see what it means in that type of environment.
So let's say somebody's watching this show, they haven't been involved in looking at municipal plan, zoning bylaw material. What's your advice for someone who might now want to know what's going on before the February 11th meeting?
Well, as terrible as I feel about this suggestion, please read the document, both documents. Please read the municipal plan, please read your zoning bylaw, understand what zone you're in, and if you don't understand what zone you're in, please ask questions. You can always contact the town. You can always contact the Southwest Service Commission. They work for you. So please ask questions. And I think the more informed you can be going into February 11th, the better off we're going to be. That meeting is from 6 to 6:30 downstairs in the council chamber. Show up, voice your concerns. The council will listen to them and they'll either take those suggestions or they won't.
All right. Well, in the meantime, here is an excerpt from the zoning bylaw draft meeting held at the W.C. O'Neill Arena last week.
So I'm going to start with the maps, if you don't mind first. So looking at the municipal plan, the draft number 1, some of the drawing seems to have changed. When you're looking at C1 out in Little Shamcook or Route 3 that goes in there, the green came to a certain spot, and when you did draft 2, it's gone right to 127 and passed into the industrial, and that was not in the original draft. So what has caused this watershed area, conservative area, to expand that much further than in the initial plan?
So that would be the C2 zone. So that's the lower priority conservation area. And I'm not sure about the first draft, and I'm just looking at the zoning bylaw map here.
if you've gone down that road, it goes to, there's a bridge, and it stopped there in the draft 1. When you came out with draft 2, it's gone down to Highway 21 and 27 and pass into the industrial area. So my question again is why?
Following the watershed. And in the Shamcook plan, or I guess the Bayside plan, it didn't follow the watershed. The watershed zone did not actually follow the watershed.
So you're saying draft 1 was incorrect and draft 2
I'd
was
have
correct?
to look at the draft.
If you wouldn't mind, yeah.
Yeah.
The current Bayside Rural Plan doesn't strictly zone based on where the actual watershed is, which in our mind is problematic, and the number one priority is drinking water quality. It's got to be prioritized over those little pieces of land being zoned for industrial.
But I appreciate that, but you're talking about miles and miles and miles away from the lake. And if you actually look at the elevation and things, I'm not quite sure that where you have conservation, there is any water there, or that it's a water shed. So the question is, if people come and can actually make a reasonable argument that your maps are incorrect, will you change them?
Okay, so there's two ways to address that. One, if there is a zone based off a mapped feature, and it's the map feature is not correct on this is something which a wetland delineator, I believe, can address, and that can be accepted as the zone boundary being off by a couple meters. But two, if you had a reasonable proposal in that area that, so say, was a business type development, and you had mitigation measures for environment, let's say you got a ministerial exemption from the watershed designation order regulation, you come in with your ministerial exemption, you apply to town council, they can evaluate it and say, well, if you follow the conditions the minister outlined for this business, we could change the zone of this property from C2 to R2, for example, and apply these terms and conditions on that and take it case by case. That's how it would go.
Is it possible to have an evaluation done and a meeting with the urban planners or municipal planners to review the area and get feedback before this becomes?
Well, absolutely. We're putting our card out and back there. We can have a meeting with you and we can look at that.
The one thing I'll say is all the environmental features on the map are based on provincial data. So the watershed is what the province says.
And the province is never wrong.
Oh no, of course. That's why we actually put the clause in about the wetland delineation. The watershed I'm fairly confident on because it's based on elevation.
I would just like some clarification. I live in Zone 1, I believe, and it says I can have an accessory dwelling unit. Now, I have a fairly small property, but how big can this accessory dwelling unit be? Is there regulations for that or what?
If it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, it cannot exceed 75% of the gross floor area of the ground floor of the main building.
Also subject to the 10%.
Or 10% of the lot size. So.
And can anyone in that zone, if they wish, then erect an accessory building?
It would probably, yes.
And have you taken into consideration that if these accessory buildings are occupied, there will be additional vehicles and so on? Have you made provisions for that?
So accessory dwelling units have been allowed in the service residential zone and estate residential zone since 2018. We've seen about 3 developed. So this isn't really a change. And the idea with lot coverage and that kind of thing is that you will have enough room on the lot to have the parking that's needed. And meet all the required setbacks and things like that. So you're not gonna infringe on neighboring yards.
I must say I just do not like the idea of densification.
Those were some questions from the public at the zoning bylaw draft meeting here at the W.C. O'Neill Arena last week.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at what the team is doing next week. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
So, I feel like I've been on a bit of a roller coaster with municipal councils in Charlotte County. I think I'm on a little bit of a, the bottom part of the roller coaster. But that work is going to continue. And I will be working toward filing some Right to Information Protection of Privacy Act stories that we've slowly been picking at over the last couple of weeks.
Well, I'm hearing wonderful things, particularly about your work in the Courier, particularly your long format work, not just here in Charlotte County, but from all over, people that have been enlightened by your work, particularly when it comes to municipal politics, because I don't think it gets covered enough in this province. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there isn't a lot of hyperlocal journalism anymore. So a lot of people are tuning in to see what you have to say, even if they're in another corner of New Brunswick. So you should be really proud of that.
I'm just glad that they stayed for the whole thing. 2,100 words of legislation explanation is probably very dry.
Oh my gosh, but some people, that's their favorite thing, for real.
It's my favorite thing. I don't know that it's their favorite thing, but it's my favorite thing.
Well, next week I will have Green Party leader for New Brunswick, David Kuhn, coming into the studio here. You know, he's a part-time Charlotte County person. He's got a place in Warwick, so he's making a trip down, and we always look forward to seeing him in our neck of the woods. So that'll be early next week. And then I'm hoping to get to Grand Manan either this coming week or the week after. So a nice trip to the island.
I promise I'll hold her to it.
Thank you for joining us this week on This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We'll see you next week.